What do you think? Which way should Keir Starmer turn?
Well, I would say steady as she goes, avoid panicky measures and avoid, above all, the endless relaunches that we saw under previous governments, way back to Gordon Brown, a relaunch every other week. Rishi Sunak on the boat, scrambling around on that boat, a new gimmick, a new relaunch, and many reshuffles. And the whole doesn't work too well. One thing about Maggie Thatcher in the blue outfit, if anybody can remember that or see that clip, is that the lady's not for turning. She might have been deeply unpopular, but people admired her for sticking to her principles.
Yeah, I think there is something in that. I mean, I obviously I'm a massive political geek and also a broadcaster, so I love watching back interviews with former leaders from the ages. And when you watch Margaret Thatcher's interviews, whether you agree with her or not, they are quite mesmerising because she is so determined in what she believes in. And I just wonder whether you're right on that one, Anthony, that if Keir Starmer was digging in, if he was reaching in somewhere into his soul in what he really believes in, and I don't think we've really seen what he truly, truly believes in other than sort of fairly boring things like, I'm a man of the law and I believe in this, that and the other. Not necessarily unimportant things, but just sort of fairly dry when it comes to politics. But if he could reach deep into his soul somewhere and find what it is that makes him passionate and what he really truly believes for the country, and then he stands by that might be a better way to stand up to the likes of Nigel Farage or the Green Party on the left or whoever it might be. You've got to have some convictions, haven't you?
Well, yes, and on that point of Nigel Farage, someone said an electoral juggernaut. Well, in terms of Parliament at the moment, is it 4 or 5? I forget.
Most 5 now. Back to 5. It was 5, then it went down to 4. Now it's back up to 5.
The megaphone politics, the GB News politics, because most of them are either members of GB News or panellists, Andrew Jenkins and so on. So they've got a wonderful platform there, haven't they? This noisy populist politics. But that's not, in this country, how we've on the whole governed this country. So if we want to swerve in the direction of Trump, well, look what's going on even today. Do we want that mess here? I don't think we do, and I don't think the electorate does.
OK. Anthony, thanks so much for your call this morning. Let's talk to Hassan, who's in Cambridge. Morning, Hassan.
Yeah, hello, hi there. Yes, I think the results have been terrible for Tories, but also for Labour. I think Starmer needs to change tack. He needs to fire Morgan McSweeney, who's his chief of staff, who's rabidly left-wing, and all he wants is to attack the left-wing of his party.
You think he's rabidly left-wing? Or right-wing, do you mean?
Right-wing, apologies.
Sorry, no worries, just want to clarify.
Morgan McSweeney is rabidly right-wing and is only interested in attacking the left wing of his party.
Okay.
I think he needs to fire Rachel Reeves, who is a terrible chancellor and very dogmatic and has no answers to the economic challenges that we face. I think this time for sort of trickle-down economics is over. I think the growth that never comes, and even if it comes, does not raise all the boats, is not the way forward. He needs to present an alternative, progressive vision to reform. And he needs to learn from 2 other elections which happened in the last few weeks, one in Australia and the one in Canada, where left-wing leaders managed to reverse or achieve massive gains by taking on Trump and Trumpism.
I think that's really interesting, Hassan, particularly in Canada, where it was so apparent that whole election was defined by difference with Donald Trump. And obviously Canada is in a slightly different predicament to the UK. It sits right next door to America, and the threat of Trump feels far more visceral when he's saying he wants to make Canada the 51st state of America. But nevertheless, I think there is a point here in the benefit of politicians sticking to their principles and actually defining themselves in opposition to populists, if that's what we want to call Donald Trump. I think many people would say is a populist. Nigel Farage too would say is a populist. If you define yourselves in opposition to those leaders, then people sort of know a bit more what you're about. If you just try and be reform light, well, people might just think I'll either go full fat reform or I'll go for something that looks more like the opposite of reform, the Green Party or the Lib Dems. So you kind of don't win anyone, do you, if you stay in the middle and try and dance around it?
No, absolutely, and I think that is what has been happening. I mean, there have been a spate of by-elections up and down the country where Labour has lost 55% of the seats that it was defending. Now we've seen that they've lost 65% of the seats they're defending. So they are completely bereft and sort of in a downward spiral and tacking more to the right, which is what he's been doing for the past 3-4 years. Right? I mean, all his policy prescriptions have been about austerity more, etc., etc., and that needs to change. But unfortunately, I think Starmer is you were talking about principles. I don't think Starmer has particularly any principles, and I think he will continue down this path. So I think for anybody who wants a progressive vision, they should go vote for the Greens. And if there are people who believe in anti-immigration, etc., they'll go and vote for reform.
Okay.
But I think he'll be stuck in the middle.
All right. Hassan, thanks so much for your call this morning. Keith's texted in to say if the Labour manifesto categorically stated no tax rises for personal allowances and no VAT increases. If Labour does that, then we should have a general election to vote on it, says Keith from Bristol. Thank you for your text. Alan's in Bury in Greater Manchester. And Alan, want to get you on the phone because you are a Labour councillor. Morning.
Hi, Paul. You all right, mate?
I'm good, thanks. So as a Labour councillor, what's your prescription? What do you think Sir Keir Starmer should do now?
Not to panic.
It's hard not to panic, isn't it, when you see what's going on around you politically?
Well, by-elections, governments normally lose by-elections. But the thing is with this reform law, it was interesting to hear the delusional politics of Andrew Fisher. Him and his lot, the Corbyn lot, led us to our worst general election victory.
Not victory. Yeah, loss.
No, our worst general election.
Do you remember someone called it
ever.
a victory once? Was it Richard
God,
Bergen?
Yeah,
do you remember? Richard Bergen said we won the election.
They're delusional. That lot are delusional. And the thing is, we lost the party to them in the 80s, and when Neil Kinnock kicked them out, and then we lost them. And the party was infiltrated, and we're not going, as far as I'm concerned, we're not going back to having all the middle-class trots who've got no idea of how to run anything, running the country.
So you say just be more patient. Reform, do you say stick to the plan, be more patient? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Let's start calling out Farage for what he is. When he was UKIP, he was the second laziest MEP. And that's an official voting record. He never turned up. He spends more time in America than he does in Clacton. And there's only ever James O'Brien correctly has a go at him. The BBC tickle his tummy. This man, he's one of the architects of Brexit, along with Cameron, Johnson, and the rest of the Tories. And Brexit has been a disaster. And that's one of the few beefs I have with Keir. Come out and tell the Tories it was your Brexit. We've lost 4% of our GDP, 15% of our trade. We are poorer because of a Tory and Farage Brexit. And no one believes it was a good idea. We do need to tack towards Europe. And we also, regarding what Louise was saying, if you're saying reindustrialise, well, Johnny Reynolds has saved the steel industry. We are taking back the rail industry bit by bit when the franchises run out. We'll probably end up taking over Thames Water because it's bankrupt. But I think she has got a point with Rachel revisiting her strategy because we now have to rearm. We
militarily,
are
because of Ukraine and Russia and America.
I worked in the arms industry. We've got about 40 Typhoons available at any one moment. We're down to about 13 frigates and destroyers. The army is down to its lowest levels, so we need to rearm quickly, and that takes money. So I think we could do what the Europeans have done, is written a rule book up and says we have to borrow to rearm.
Okay, so borrowing rather than raising taxes.
Yeah, well, we said we wouldn't raise taxes. The thing is, it wouldn't bother me if we did have a wealth tax or a Robin Hood tax on financial transactions. But at the end of the day, we've given our word and we have to stick to our word. But overall, my message is don't panic. And the thing is, it's good like people like Andrea Jenkins getting elected, because I just feel sorry for the people of Lincolnshire having someone who it was never a star in a really poor government, and I'm being generous there. And all this reform law, who've had no idea about our own being local councillors, they're now going to have to start delivering.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in the Labour Party agree with you on that point, that they're now going to have very visible measures of how well they're doing as a party, Reform UK, because it's one thing to be out of government or out of power in local councils and criticising from the sidelines. It's a very different thing to be in those positions and having to prove that you've got the competence to run them.
Yeah, and also they were surprised how much time they've got to give as a local councillor. I've got to go to a committee meeting. What's all the emails you get, all the time it takes up out of your life, the personal time it takes up out of your life. They've got to start performing, and they will find out that there's hardly any waste in councils because we've been cut to the bone.
What about this Doge plan to get rid of diversity and inclusion officers? Have you got many of those on Manchester Council?
I'm on Bury Council.
Oh, you're on Bury Council. My apologies.
It's in Greater Manchester, but I don't know of any diversion or inclusion officers. We have to include it in policy because it's the law. But at the end of the day, I think in Bury we've been cut by about 143 million. So all the so-called waste, if you want to call it that, we've had to become very efficient. We've had to think out of the box. At the end of the day, I've got some damn good council officers working for me, who a lot of them work unpaid overtime. They send me emails when they're on holiday.
Okay. So there's no fat to cut. There's no fat left to cut.
No, there's no marrow left to cut, Paul.
No marrow left to cut. All right, Alan, thank you. Peter's in Cardiff this morning, and of course, morning, Peter. There, you've had Labour in government, well, non-stop since '98.
Well, I can go back further than that, Paul. Certainly they've been in power for as long as I've been on the planet, and that's well over 50 years. And actually, one of your co-presenters ran as a candidate, if my memory serves me right, as a Conservative candidate in the Port Talbot Nice borough in 2002, and polled less votes than a character called Mr. Beanie, who is quite well known down there for his charity work, and dresses as a bean. But that's the country. Last week, which hasn't been covered at all by the press nationally, there was a by-election in Bridgend in a council.
Yeah.
And Bridgend being quite an industrial, the heartland of coal and steel.
Post-industrial, but yeah.
Post-industrial, yeah. Well, so some of us hope. Anyway, in the by-election on Thursday, Reform gained power.
Yep.
And also in a place called Ysturganlais, which is the heart of Neath, Mr. Kinnock's constituency. Reform gained power. Now, they didn't gain power because suddenly Wales has become a far-right, let's go for it all country. It's because we are not governed by a Labour government at the moment. I don't think you can actually put your hand on your heart and say that the decisions made in Westminster are inspired by Labour values. I don't claim benefits. Cutting benefits for disabled people. Where did that come from? Who sat down and thought that was a great idea? And with progressive taxation, I also don't think you should go hell for leather and let's tax the super rich.
But in Bridgend, in Bridgend, right, the by-election there, I'm from Bridgend, so I take a keen interest in Bridgend politics. Reform UK came top, Labour came second, and then in sixth place was the Green Party with 54 votes. Now, the Green Party agrees with many of the things that Louise Haigh would be arguing for this morning, and certainly many of the things that Andrew Fisher and others who've talked about a wealth tax are arguing for. Where's the appetite for a more left-wing Labour that you're espousing here when they only got 54 votes, the Green Party?
Just a second. Who's opposing a left-wing Labour? I'm supposing there's a we call them social democracy, I guess. And I was just about to say, don't pitch the left against the right. Pitch where I thought we were in the middle. So for instance, if I paid a lot of tax, I was happy to pay taxes. If you're earning an amount of money that you can survive on, you pay a higher proportion of your tax. When they say tax the wealthy, it's playing right into the hands of people who say, "Oh, hang on, they're all going to leave the country." Just progressive taxation. So we have we're all in this together. I know down the road in Port Talbot, if they Neil Kinnock's son's constituency, they're going to go to reform, or at least lose a huge chunk of Labour support. And
so what are you arguing for, Peter? Just for the party to be a centrist party, a centrist Labour Party, a social democratic party? I think that's what it is already, though, isn't it?
If it was, it wouldn't bring out. You wouldn't have ministers almost with glee saying, "Oh no, these people on benefits, these disabled people." I'll give you just one instance. In Port Talbot, there's a chap called Michael Sheen. Michael Sheen.
The actor,
Michael Sheen. But you know what he's done himself to protect the poor in Port Talbot and that area. He's paid off £1 million worth of their debt out of his own pocket because he sat in a cafe in Port Talbot and saw grown men cry, worrying about the future. Now, these guys have given their lives to an industry, and we should be not. Surely, as a country, we're wealthy enough to ensure that we don't have to go to disable people. We don't have to put children on the breadline, and at the same time, we don't have to say, "Well, you multi-millionaires are paying for it." In Europe. Countries in Europe, they have a progressive taxation.
Okay.
And there are people who are quite happy, earning a lot of money, to pay a fair price. But if Labour don't change and don't get more sensible, they'd be out of Wales.
Yeah, well, Reform UK are obviously eyeing the Welsh elections next May as well. Peter, thank you for your call this morning. Dale's texted in saying, why did Alan, he was the Labour councillor we had on from Bury a few minutes ago, why did Alan have to bash his own party? Don't panic, says Alan, he's deluded, says Dale. His wing of the Labour Party is responsible for this shambles of a Labour Party. They're hemorrhaging voters and Reform battered them. Dump this right-wing Labour government, says Dale. Dump this councillor, change the leader, not the party, and full reverse. Otherwise, it's Farage's win come the general election, predicts Dale. So there are quite a few of you texting in saying, yeah, increase taxes, make Labour more, as some would define it, left-wing, more true to its roots, perhaps, in terms of investing in public services and having a higher tax burden overall. Others, though, I think plenty of you texting in saying that, people will ultimately turn their noses up at Labour if they see higher taxes. Tony says, raise taxes and face decimation. Hilarious, says Tony. So keep your calls and texts coming in 0345 6060 973. You can text me 84850. What do you think Labour should do in response to Reform UK's rise? David's in Enfield this morning. Hi, David.
Good morning, Paul. Nice to hear you. Glad you're well.
Yep, I hope you're well too. So what should Labour do?
Well, I think we have to look at the biggest problem facing the country to put this discussion into context. Because what we've seen here in the last 35 years, we've seen the biggest rise in income inequality in our society in history. We're now the most unequal society in terms of income in Europe. And a few months ago, the University of Greenwich, they did a study. They went back to 1989 when the Sunday Times first published its rich list, and they analysed how wealth disparity had grown. Now, since 1989, the wealth of the 200 richest families in the country have increased from £42 billion to £711 billion currently. 200 richest families. Now, the number of billionaires has risen from 11 in 1989 to 165 today. Now, some of those, obviously, are people who were, amongst these 10,000 that were given golden visas, these foreign businessmen, and non-dom status. But that's incredible. And they concluded the richest 52 families in the UK have more wealth than the bottom half of the population combined, 34 million people. So there's the problem. And
so you say wealth tax then, do you, David?
What I'm saying is, if we look at the current state of the public finances, the national debt's gone from 1 trillion to nearly 3 trillion pounds since 2010. We're paying 100 billion a year in interest now, which can't go into public services. Right, and the other problem is the overall tax burden. The average real wage for the average worker has not increased since 2007. It's still at the same level today as it was in 2007. So you've had this massive transfer of wealth from the working class to the wealthy people. And you can't tax ordinary people anymore. You just can't do it.
Well, Mike's Sexton, he says, I work in private security for the so-called 1%. They're leaving the country in record numbers. We've lost 4 clients, he says. They move the money in a few days and just mothball their houses. They can still come into the country for 90 days under a normal tourist visa. So who will Labour come after next? Says Mike. So this is the age-old argument, isn't it? That if you tax the wealthy, then they leave the country, and then we don't get that trickle-down effect of them investing in Britain.
I disagree entirely. You're going to lose. I mean, there are people like this Jim Ratcliffe, who was this big pro-Brexit proponent, and what he did in 2020, he quit the country, went to Monaco, and he took his car plant for the Grenadiers, as well as the building in South Wales. He took it to France. So those people. You can't stop those sort of people moving around if they only got their self-interest at heart.
I have to say that I'm not a political person, but I do take an interest.
Mm-hmm.
First thing I wanted to say was that had this not been the local council elections and had been a general election, it's possible that we could have now had Prime Minister Farage, because he really is more of a person with the people. And I also think that it's almost as though Labour thought that with such a landslide victory in taking away the winter fuel allowance would be acceptable, when if we actually were warned about their intentions, it could have been reduced gradually to cover the questionable 22 billion deficit. So really, on this point alone, it does need to be reviewed, or preferably replace the Chancellor.
Do you think sack Rachel Reeves?
I think maybe sideline a little bit. Maybe a different seat would be better.
A different seat round the cabinet table, okay.
Somewhere, or, it really was a tremendous shock to everybody. It should have been done gradually. We could have been warned about it. I'm somebody who would benefit from it, along with millions of other people.
Okay. Anna, thank you very much for your call. Malcolm's called in from Ruthin in Denbighshire in North Wales. Hi, Malcolm.
Morning.
You are a Labour staffer. You work for an MP, don't you?
I do, yeah.
So, obviously, these are live discussions going on in Parliament. What do you think Sir Keir Starmer's reaction should be to Friday's results?
Well, first of all, I like to emphasise I'm calling in a personal capacity. My boss doesn't know who that I'm calling, and I'm not going to tell you who she is.
Mm-hmm.
So these are very personal views. I think my first reaction really is to what Louise Haig has said. I think it would be absolutely insane for us to put up income tax, VAT, or personal national insurance. We've already got lots and lots of people calling us LIBOR and saying that they didn't vote for a lot of the measures that we've taken. You've just heard somebody else talking about winter fuel. I don't want to go over that again, except to say that I did a reasonable amount of campaigning in Runcorn, and it came up time after time after time. People would literally say, you took away my winter fuel allowance, never again, and would then just close the door. So to campaign very, very strongly on a stance of we are not going to raise any of these 3 taxes, and then reverse that and do exactly that within 12 months would I think just electorally be just completely balmy, and I can't see where the logic is in that at all, frankly.
What about reversing the means testing of winter fuel allowance?
Well, it's not particularly means tested. It's you either get it if you're on pension credit, or you don't get it at all. I think it's a tough one. Personally, I'm of pensionable age. My wife and I received it. We didn't particularly need it. My mother is in a care home and was getting £300 a year because she's well over 80 and doesn't even pay her own bills. So I think we could have looked at it much more rigorously than we did. But I think I've got a feeling, frankly, that ship has sailed, and I think we've got to look at bigger issues. I mean, we are losing the comms battle. Some of this stuff about, if last week's results had been repeated, Farage would be Prime Minister. I mean, it's just so wide of the mark. I mean, the other thing that came up for me in Runcorn is in the western part of the constituency, that's Frodsham and Helsby and some of the villages, we had a number of people who 2 weeks before the election were saying, yes, I'm sticking with Labour, who in the last week or so said, well, actually, no, I'm going to cast a protest vote for the Greens. Right. There was apparently quite a charismatic local councillor who was the Green candidate for them in the general election. And people were saying things like, well, Labour are going to get in anyway, so I've cast a protest vote. Now, some of these people we persuaded that actually it was going to be pretty challenging. Others said, well, I've cast my vote, or I cast it by post or whatever. And I could take you to literally half a dozen houses that if they voted differently would have swung that election.
The result with those 6 votes.
So I wouldn't read a massive amount into that and extrapolate to the fact that, Farage is going to be sitting in number 10. But I do think Starmer, unfortunately, is not a fantastic communicator, and he's also not driven by an overriding political ideology. So some people don't get what he stands for. But I think there are areas where particularly he's taking a lead, for example, around foreign policy, on getting closer to Europe, where I think we need to make a lot more noise about this. I mean, 2/3 of people now think Brexit was a mistake.
Good luck arguing to rejoin the EU, though, Malcolm.
I'm not saying that, but I am saying we should be working much more closely with them. We're always going to get slated by the Daily Mail, whatever we do. So worrying about them is just it's just a waste of time. I mean, I think we should go harder on Europe. I think we should be listening to people like patriotic millionaires. I think wealth tax does need looking at. I am worried that Rachel Reeves has been captured by the Treasury and has wedded herself too closely to fiscal rules, which are artificial constructs anyway. And I think we've got to just communicate. I've got some sympathy with what Alan said, the councillor from Bury, in terms of sticking to what we're trying to do. But I think we've just got to communicate it so much better. When Richard Tice is on the media every week saying climate change is not happening, and by the way, I'm just off again to see my partner in Dubai this weekend, people are believing this stuff. And it's just scientifically not the case.